of the Board of Education, Rochester Community Unit School District 3A. It is 6:30, so we're going to go ahead and get our meeting started. Will you please call the roll?
Mr. File?
Here.
Mr. Gade?
Yes.
Mr. Hanna?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Dr. Magulius?
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Okay, next on our agenda is recognition of visitors and public comments. So if there are visitors who wish to address the board, this is your time to do it. We ask visitors and guests to keep their comments to 5 minutes or less, and we use 30 minutes at the front of a meeting for any public comment. So I do have 4 people who already said they'd like to speak. So that would be Sarah Williamson, if you want to start.
Thank you so much for letting me speak. Is this on?
Is it okay, Tavis? I think it's for sound for our stream more so than a microphone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. On August 4th, the CDC updated its guidance for COVID-19 prevention in K-12 schools to recommend universal indoor masking for all students, staff, teachers, and visitors to K-12 schools regardless of vaccination status. The CDC says students should wear masks indoors. The American Academy of Pediatrics says students should wear masks indoors. Doctors and our most trusted health professionals say students should wear masks indoors. This was said by somebody in the Illinois State House today. I am pro-mask because that is the best interest of all the children in the school district, not just my child. Want to talk about choice? Why should an anti-masker get to choose whether they vaccinate their child or not, and whether they mask their child or not? Whereas I am a mother of a child not able to get vaccinated yet, so I don't have a vaccination choice, and I don't get an option to remote learn, even if you all decide masking is only optional. So you take away my ability to protect my son. If you want to talk about choice, it was talked about in the previous meeting that parents don't wash their children's masks. Well, that's a choice. If you want to continue to state there has been no transmissions of COVID-19 in a Rochester school, masking optional is not the way to proceed. I also understand you're not requiring vaccinations of faculty and staff. Only 58.4% of Sangamon County eligible residents are fully vaccinated, according to CDC's COVID data tracker as of today. You can require to see a vaccination card as an employer and as a school. You already do as a school. IDPH school requirements for kindergarten, exams, physical, vision, dental, vaccines, DTaP, polio, MMR, varicella, and boosters. IDPH school requirements for second grade, dental exam. Once again, it comes to choice. You as a school district are choosing not to require vaccinations of personnel. I predict that we will be having this discussion next year because as a society, we have decided our personal preferences are more important than the consequences of those choices. Since when is the death of a child an acceptable risk? I'll end with this. My uncle died of COVID before there was a vaccine. I will never forget him gasping for each breath before he died. My in-laws currently have COVID, but it is a mild case due to them being vaccinated. Why wouldn't you do everything needed to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in Rochester schools? Thank you.
Thank you. Megan Beckwith?
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here. I also want to thank you for saying your piece here tonight. I would like to start by just pointing out that the same people who were telling you that Lollapalooza was not going to be a super spreader, and the same people who probably attended our former President Barry's party over the weekend are the same people telling you that you need to mask all students regardless of circumstances, regardless of whether or not they're vaccinated, regardless of whether or not maybe they're just going into preschool or kindergarten. And it is for a child of that age, absolutely inappropriate to mask them while they are learning off of people's facial expressions. They're learning how to express their own emotions. We're going to end up with children who are robotic, just robotic, just doing what they're told all the time, okay? I truly believe that the reason that this is a free country is to protect people from having just arbitrary laws that say, this is going to be, everyone's going to do this, regardless. Okay, and thank you. There are a lot of people, I think, here tonight who understand that the masking is just a little bit of what's really going on in this country. And it's bringing things to a head, but it needs to happen. And, you know, I know that there's a spouse of a board member who made a comment for some of us to just go get our own all-American schools where we can do what we want. Well, I would say the same. If you don't want a mask, why don't you get your own un-American schools, okay?
Amen, that's right.
Get your own un-American schools. The biggest point that I want to make is that there are ways that you can separate children who don't want to be masked and their parents don't want them to be masked and people who do, and still let all the kids go to school. There are ways you can accommodate everyone and no one's even trying. It's absolutely ridiculous. My kids won't be going to school this year. I'm very fortunate that both of my children would hopefully start school next year in preschool and kindergarten in this school. Okay, I feel awful for the parents who were just blindsided at the last minute that, oh, if you want, you know, they could have maybe made other options. And the biggest thing I want to say to you all is we're Americans. We do have other options. If any of you want to get with me after this, let's exchange phone numbers. We absolutely could make our own schools if we need to. I've been thinking about it. I have ideas, and I know you do too. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
So we're going to continue with public comment, and I just want to ask and remind everyone, we've already had two speakers that have very differing opinions and thoughts. And so please, please be respectful for everyone who's here so that we can hear each person's and respect what their thoughts and opinions are when they speak. Okay. The next person who asked to speak was Dawn Span.
I had sent the board members an email earlier this afternoon, and I just wanted to read what I put so the public knows what I had put. My name's Dawn Span, and I'm the parent of two children who have attended school in this district. One is going into 5th grade, and the other is going into 2nd. One of my boys is a nonverbal special needs kid, as the other is just a 7-year-old Spitfire. I want to first and foremost formally thank the board for your service that you have provided and will continue to provide for our community, as I do not envy any of you being in this position you are currently in. I have attended many school board meetings, and if I was not able to make it in person, I have called in or watched the replays, if available, and I always read the board minutes. I have sat all weekend with a heavy heart and a lot of things pulling at my heartstrings, and I have come to the conclusion that I cannot be silent, and I must speak up for my parental rights and my children. I have been told numerous times by administration of this school and staff that I am my child's biggest advocate. Am I? Yes, I am. I, as many parents, have expressed our concerns for our children. I received an email on August 4th from Superintendent Dan Cox, as well as the rest of the public body, did in this district in response to the governor's mandate of masking. And after reading through this email numerous times, I have the following questions. With the current email communication from the superintendent on his recommendation to the board to comply with the mandate, why? It is vague to stating according to health officials. What health officials? The CDC, the IDPH, ISBE? I personally watched the governor as he made this mandate and was appalled that he specifically stated that if districts don't comply, they will lose funding. I must ask what legalities are in play that he can do this. What are the recommendations from our own district's legal counsel? Can the board give out material safety data sheets on what type of PPE, personal protective equipment, i.e. the mask, that is going to be required? Will all children be required to wear the same mask? As stated that if the mask mandate is to be followed, will the students have break times worked into their daily schedule to remove the mask? If so, how many and for how long? If the school district going to supply masks in every room in case students have coughed, sneezed in them? Will they also be in the children's sizes? Is the school board going to allow vaccinations to be given without parental consent? What provisions have been made for special needs students as far as masking and off-campus instruction? What are the driving factors for the board's decision? The Sangamon County Health Department, CDC, ISBE, the threat of possible funding decline for those that do not adhere to state or federal suggestions, recommendations, mandates? What cleaning procedures have been put in place by the board or the superintendent? Is there a checkoff sheet for times of cleaning during the school day for common areas of contact, the bathrooms or cafeterias? If mandated to wear a mask full time, will temperature checks be taken before getting on the school bus or before admittance to the school buildings? Will parents be required to self-certify their child like last year? Will off-campus remote instruction be allowed for the 21-22 school year? Will my child, who has special needs and will not wear a mask, and I do have a written note from his pediatrician, be segregated in a classroom because of this? If all kids are wearing a mask and kids still get sick, how can we obtain a report for the air handling units for each school to see if they are working properly and moving clean air throughout the buildings? If the board is concerned with losing funding, how long will a school be able to survive if most of the general public pull their kids out of district to attend school somewhere else or even homeschool? I would implore the board to make the best decision possible based on facts, not media or threats being passed down. I personally would back you and spend time researching in an effort to help you for being a trailblazer and standing up for our children, parents, teachers, and staff of this community. Thank you.
Jill Westphal?
Well, again, thank you. You guys are in a tough spot. I would not want to be in any of your positions, but I'm glad that you're here. I'm not a public speaker, so I'm a little nervous, but I also have a child with special needs. I've sent you guys an email divulging more information about him than I feel is necessary and that I need to. Enough is enough. I've been a nurse for 16 years. I follow science for my job every single day. Every day. Is this science or is this political science? That's the biggest problem that I have with this. Our children deserve to be mask-free. I know how long these masks are effective for. I know when they are dirty. I know what their purpose is. It's not for airborne pathogens. I work in surgery. I know why we wear masks. These masks do not separate the particles. N95s do, and these children are not wearing N95s.
Nor should they.
They shouldn't be wearing cloth. So essentially, this falls on you. I wouldn't want to be in your position. I really don't. You're going to make people happy. You're going to make people mad. You're in a tough spot, and I feel sorry for you. But ultimately, this is a parental decision on how we send our children to school, and we're asking for you to respect those wishes, which is to be optional. And I looked at some statistics on Illinois specifically today, and the highest rate of COVID-positive patients under the age of 18 was from, and this was looking from April of 2020 until current date. The highest number that we had was in November of 2020 to February of 21. That's when masks were mandated. That is the peak flu season, but yet flu was not existent this year. Did they even test anybody for flu? Or was everything just botched as COVID? There's questions about the tests and how accurate they are. I don't know what science to believe anymore. You know, I don't follow social media. I mean, I follow reputable sites. I don't have any faith in the CDC any longer. I think they've become a political entity, and it's created hell and chaos in our society today. So I'm just asking for you to understand parental wishes. I know some of you kids have kids in the school district. This is our decision. We would love for you to respect it and let us send our kids the way that we know is best for them. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, at the start of the meeting, I asked if there were any speakers, and I had those 4. Is there anyone else who arrived that wants to speak as well?
If everyone's done, I'll take a shot. I spoke with
Okay.
Dan Cox accent. He said I would be able to speak.
Okay, so it is 5 minutes or less, and you have the floor. You're the next speaker.
Well, maybe they'll give me a little extra time since there was only 4 people who spoke. My name is Paul Raphael DeJean. I'm a Patriot officer on Clear Lake Avenue. I came here to address this board. I got probably a 20-minute speech I could lay out on you, but I'll just do it off the cuff. The country's kind of at a crossroads. We're not trying to be disrespectful. Why did I choose Rochester? I chose it because for Friday night football. We chose it because you had good school district. We chose it because you were not part of the 186. We chose it because there's a single district office. There's a single school that holds the 1,000 children of the 4,000 people that live in this town. That's why we chose Rochester. We didn't really choose it to not have the American way. We chose it for the American way. So then, like some of these people have already alluded to, the science, there is no science behind it, okay? You wear a mask, you don't wear a mask. You get a vaccine, you don't get a vaccine. You wear 2 masks, now you have to wear 2 masks and have a vaccine. Oh, if you have a vaccine, then you still have to wear a mask, but the other people are the ones who are the spreaders. The whole thing is really bad. The CDC just admitted today that they've never isolated the COVID virus. There is no science behind any of it. All this is a political event. So, I want to just start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I don't see a flag in here anywhere, but I'm going to lead the people in it anyways, because it's an important thing to think about. So, if anybody join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So what's going on in the rest of these countries? Well, in Cuba, they're shouting liberty. They're not shouting give us vaccines, they're shouting liberty. In France, they're out there protesting Emmanuel Macron, and they say, we don't want vaccine passports. We're going to burn these passports in the street. We're not going to wear the mask. We're done with it. Matter of fact, his own guard is no longer protecting the president of France. Does anybody know that? In Italy, you know what they're shouting? Freedom. Do you know what's going on in Australia right now? Sydney, Australia has 2.1 million people under military lockdown who are absorbing forced injections of an experimental vaccine. Okay, so these are not good things. This is not the American way. You know what we have? We have this one thing called a Bill of Rights. Your Bill of Rights is not a protest, folks. It is your God-given birthright because you were born in America, unalienable rights endowed by your Creator. These rights are not to be taken for the whim of a CDC. Who is the CDC? They have no authority of any kind. You know what they have? They're in the vaccine business. That's what their interest is. So, a lot of families are not into vaccines. My family in particular, we're religious. I joined the Holiness Church when this whole hoax began because the Catholic Church had gone ahead and promoted this nonsense. So, then you got to ask yourself, at what point do we draw the line? We draw the line right here at the school board. You know, there's a school board president that makes $180,000 a year. Well, we're not really paying you that kind of money to put our children in lockdown. We're not asking you to take this money to tell us what to do with our own children. We are not interested in those things. So if you're under the impression that you're doing anybody's will but your own political will that you are for, take a look at your crowd, because guess what? Next week it's going to be double this size. It's only going to get worse for the people who don't really realize the people don't want these things. Why did 50% of the people in America say no to these experimental vaccines? Because they're not very great. They're having a hard time with them. There are 1 million dead people worldwide from the vaccine. Whether you want to believe it or not, it's true. The CDC put some out, said 45,000 people in America died from the end of June to the beginning of July. Though that 2-week period of time, 45,000 deaths in America. Only 36,000 died of the COVID, which has never been isolated. So now they break out this new thing. Oh, the Delta variant, the Lambda variant. You know what? We're not afraid of it. None of us are. The most interesting thing to me is how is it that the people who are the least healthy are going to give the healthy people all the advice? Does that make any sense at all? It does not make sense. So guess what? We have these thing called Bill of Rights. We're going to exercise our Bill of Rights. We're going to sue you inside out if you try and take the rights of our children. Now, we'll talk about the governor. The governor lost every single case concerning his mask mandates. On April 6th, his 30-day emergency expired. He said, you're going to have a mask mandate anyways. Guess what? Illinois Representative Darren Bailey sued him in court and whipped him in Clay County Court. The governor lost the case. What did the governor do? He says, now you have a more expensive fine. Darren Bailey took him back to the court the second time. He says, you know what? I'm a representative of the people. I represent the people, and I have standing for that reason. So therefore, I'm suing on behalf of the people. You know what it said? Nobody's got to wear a mask in the state of Illinois. So the governor said, now the fine is $2,000. I'll finish in a moment, Christy. We're neighbors. You can wait. So the next thing that happened was after the $2,000 fine.
I want to speak. I give Paul my 5 minutes.
I'll take your standing. Thank you. Appreciate that, sir. So then after the governor lost his second case, Darren Bailey took him back to the court, and he says, this governor needs to be held in contempt of court. You know what the judge says? You're in contempt of the court. So they moved it over to Sangamon County. They moved it to Sangamon County, made it all the way to Supreme Court. Supreme Court of Illinois said, send it back to the Clay County judge. There is no authority. The CDC has no authority. The government has no legislative authority. You have no authority. You can pretend you have the authority. What you have is perceived authority, but your authority runs out when you lose the mandate of the people, which you have already lost. Now, we'll talk about the other school districts nearby. Lots of them are not playing this stupid game. They're not even doing it. You know what? They don't have any more sick people than anywhere else. What's going on in Florida? Florida's not doing this. They got tourists from all over the world. They come on in. They enjoy the Sunshine State. And lo and behold, there's nobody dying. Okay, so we're not afraid of it. You know what we're afraid of? We're afraid of being told we don't have American Bill of Rights anymore. That's what we're going to stand up for. So we can talk about some of these stats since this man was generous enough to give me his time. Yeah, 36 million flu cases in 2019. Anybody want to make a guess how many flu cases there were in 2020? 1,840. Oh my! Where did the other 35 million plus flu cases go? Oh, they all got trampled right into COVID. Okay, it's not real. The state of Florida has an older population than Illinois. They never locked down. They stayed open. They enjoyed life. They did not make prisoners of their people. They suffered no more health than any other year. I think we all know that the lockdowns were a terrible mistake. Now the stats are even more glaring. A flu with a 99.997 recovery rate is not the Spanish flu of the 1930s. Public schools should teach the kids about their God-given rights, endowed by their Creator. All men are created equal, and that the consent of the governed is not mandated, but is given by the people through laws in a legislative process. That's what you all forgot. There are no laws. There has been no legislative process. Where is our due process? When are you going to respect the people? The governor fully defeated. Our freedoms do not come from the governor. They do not come from the president. They do not come from the Center for Disease Control. They do not come from this school board. Matter of fact, our children are Americans. Their freedoms come from God. So, truthfully, if you don't like it, you ought to go to a country like Cuba, where they're fighting in the streets, calling for liberty, because that's where you belong if you want to be in a communist nation. Nobody wants that. Ironically, the CDC is in the vaccine business, has a total bias to promote these lockdowns and the experimental treatments. These are well-known facts. In light of our rights, the rights of our children, we must reevaluate the knee-jerk reactions, political overreach, and correct the course for this local community. And I'll finish with, God bless America. And I'll be back next week with the full speech. That was really stuff.
Are there any other folks who wish to address the board? Okay, we're going to go on with the rest of our meeting, and I just ask that you recognize that it's a business meeting. It's a Board of Education business meeting. We don't take any more comments from visitors during the rest of this meeting. Thank you. Okay. Discussion and action on Rochester CUSD3A Instructional Continuity Learning Plan. There is a federal requirement for an instructional continuity learning plan for the 21-22 school year. Mr. Cox will present the plan for Rochester School District. This is lengthy. with much detailed data background that he has provided from sources and from questions that have been asked by the board and others.
All right, you ready?
Yep, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Medelius. And, you know, before I begin,
Could you speak into that mic, sir? Nobody can hear you at all.
there is no mic, but I'll try to speak up.
The mic doesn't,
Well, take your mask off, maybe we'll be able to hear you.
Mr. Lejeune?
Bring that mic down.
It's
Well,
hard
we
to
can't even hear you.
hearing here. I'm trying to hear you.
How are we supposed to participate?
You can't participate.
It's called hearing. How
You
is
cannot,
we
let's
hear?
clear something up though. You cannot participate from this point forward.
Okay, well,
Now,
hearing is part of
He
participation.
said that he would speak up for you, okay?
What's that microphone for?
for the streaming,
For the stream, that's what that microphone was for too. It's for the streaming of the video of this meeting, okay?
Oh, there's other
But
people
from
that saw
this
this?
point forward, there's no participation.
Okay, before I begin, you know, I want to thank our speakers and everyone recognizing the enormity of what we're facing here and the difficulty of everything that we face. I'll say this more than once. There is no right side or wrong side. Everyone has their own personal experiences. They have their own beliefs. They have their own information that's helped craft their opinions in the way they feel. And that does not make one side right, one side wrong. There's not winners, losers, heroes, and villains in this place. Ultimately, as a public school district, our primary goal is to educate children and to get kids in school all day, every day, in an environment where teachers teach, where kids learn, in an environment where we have as little transmission as possible of COVID-19 so we can continue to move forward through the school year. So I want to walk, and bear with me if I forget to switch slides because my computer and the presentation on the board are not in sync. I just want to walk through a little timeline of where we've been, where we are, and where we could be going. First and foremost, at the beginning of the summer, myself and other superintendents started a grassroots effort, if you will, for local control. We are getting deep into the summer without any guidance updates, any information at all, meaning we would start the school year off where we finished it or even backwards. We pushed for local control to be able to make decisions locally based on our health data with our health department. Later in about 200 school districts signed on to that letter that was sent to the governor, and then there was 2 to 3 other regions in the state that did the same with varying results, but still a great number of people that signed on. Later in the summer, we were granted local control to be able to make those decisions. At the July regular Board of Education meeting, I presented a draft plan to the board that's very similar to the plan that you have before you this evening. It's very similar to the plan that we put out with the public last week, with one stark difference. That difference would be, at that time, masks were strongly recommended, but not required. We did have the discussion at that meeting that this too can change because things are very fluid and we know that there's going to be a lot of information come out over the next few weeks and even months. Since that meeting, we've had announcements from and information given to us from the CDC, the IDPH, and the State Board of Education, primarily. Each one with language more sharper, recommending and strongly recommending that masks be required. The other thing that came out during that time that was did not have quite as much publicity and it didn't get as much media attention, but it came the same day actually as the media release for the CDC, was the definition changing of close contacts. Meaning as long as school districts are able to provide universal masking and some type of distancing to the extent possible, school districts do not have to contact trace or quarantine. The other piece was the test to stay policy. In the test to stay policy set forth by the Illinois State Board of Education, this policy is if the infected individual is wearing a mask and the individual that would be a close contact is wearing a mask, the individual who is the close contact does not have to quarantine as long as they could produce a negative test result on days 1, 3, 5, and 7. And then the last piece, but not least, is there an announcement, and that we had the ability to do this last year, though it wasn't permitted by our local health department, of having quarantines anywhere from 14, 10 to 7 days. At that time, that's whenever our recommendations started to shift, and for this very reason, even prior to the governor's mandate. And it's for this very reason. Last year, At this time, we spent an enormous amount of time administratively with our teachers, internally with our Board of Education, debating, do we wear a mask, do we not wear a mask? How are we going to get people to wear a mask? How are we going to social distance? How are we going to do capacity limits on buses? How are we going to do lunch? Those things weren't easy to figure out, but ultimately we did that. What was our big worries in the summer whenever we started school? We were able to figure out with one big exception. The thing we couldn't figure out was the quarantine. The quarantine was the most harmful thing we had during the school year to continuity for education. Whenever kids had to miss for 2 weeks, whenever staff had to miss for 2 weeks, that was something that was just disruptive that we could not figure out. So we fast forward to this summer, and along with the announcement of the CDC, whenever we saw a tool to greatly reduce or even eliminate quarantine, it's something just responsibly from an educator standpoint that we had to recommend and take into great consideration. Does that mean it's going to be forever? Does that mean putting masks on is a forever thing? No, it does not. And we'll get to that later in the presentation. But what it does mean is today, our best chance to keep kids in school all day, every day, is just that, by putting the mask on. And I'm not here to tell you, I'm not qualified to tell you whether to put a mask on or not. I'm not here to debate the merits of the CDC, the IDPH, ISBE. But I do know this. Organizations that spend billions of dollars a year looking at medical practice, it's something that we do have a duty to take notice of and at least consider. Shortly after that, we did receive the governor's mandate, and that mandate was the order to require masks in pre-K through 12. So, one of the questions we talk about with staff and internally as we've been sorting through this, ultimately, what do we want? And I'll save everybody the exercise and going through it, but we really challenged each other. Let's in a perfect world, what do we want? Knowing that this is anything but a perfect world. And one of the things as educators that we want our kids in school, and we need our kids in school to learn. A realization hit me 2 weeks ago, and it still doesn't seem real to me. We're in the third school year with COVID. It doesn't even seem real or possible. We missed the end of the spring. Last year was an incredibly difficult year, and it looks like this year is going to present many challenges as well. Our second grade students do not know school without COVID. That's alarming to me. More so because of the starting, stopping, and lack of continuity for education, which ultimately has to be our goal. So one of the things we did to get people's feedback and get people's opinions that we'll spend a little time on is releasing a thought exchange, and we have a little bit of information to share from that. The question was, after reading our draft opening plan, what are the most important things our district needs to consider to support all students during the next school year? We had 271 participants in this exchange, and we had 103 individuals who shared thoughts in that exchange. We sent out 2,288 invitations for that exchange, and during that same time, I just found it interesting. When we had 130 people sharing thoughts, we had 143 people that signed up for shield screening. So it just shows the varying diversity we have in opinions and what's important to various groups in our district. So that question, what do we want? We have a top 10 here. I'm not going to read that top 10. We're going to share that in a report with the community and also share that, you've already had access to that report as the Board of Education. But the bottom line is what we want, there's big differences. There's differences on one side and the other, specifically around masking. That being said, where we come together, which we'll illustrate, is despite our differences in certain approaches, where we come together is we want our kids in school all day, every day. We want our kids learning, and we want our kids in their clubs and their activities. As we desegregated the data, and what we look at is information is non-duplicative thoughts that are rated 3.3 or higher, and it starts to, thank you.
Yeah. Next.
Yeah, thank you. It starts to, we break that down into areas of theme. So here's the things from left to right, and I will read this, the bar graph from left to right. with the highest ranked areas of importance to the lowest ranked that are rated 3.3 or higher. So that doesn't mean the thing on the right is not important. These are the top rated thoughts that came out of the exchange and theme. To prioritize in-person instruction, to prioritize high quality instruction, to prioritize community unity and student belonging, to prioritize safety and lowering transmission, prioritizing consistency with area schools and states, and to prioritize parent and teacher choice. This next piece is really powerful. It's where do we differ? And again, to talk about side A and side B. So side A is on the left with really strongly rated comments and strong feelings about masks being optional. Okay, on side B, clear to the right, these are very strong feelings about we want masks, at least to start. And you can see the people on side A rank side B very low and vice versa. We were split almost down the middle. The Venn diagram in the middle is split down the middle about who would rather have choice versus who would rather have masks on. Here's where we came together, and it was in the middle. And the middle is students need to be in school. We want our kids in school all day, every day. And that's where we can, that's where we can come together. Okay, I want to be really clear, and I said this to start, but it bears repeating. There is no right or wrong when we talk about masks versus mask required versus mask optional. There's no heroes versus villains. We're all on the same team here trying to figure out how to get our kids in school and keep our kids in school. It's been a long road. It's been 3 years of school years of a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty. People are tired, and people have their own personal opinions and feelings and experiences that shape those. It's our duty to try to listen to all those and keep finding out where we come together. And where we come together is we need to create conditions where teachers teach and students learn. That's the primary role we have as a school district. And there's certainly challenges that are in our way, obviously, as demonstrated here this evening. We've got a lot of tough decisions ahead of us. Last year, I was asked the question, what did our exchange look like? Last year, if you recall, we were sitting here around the same time deciding, are we going to start school in person? Are we going to start school hybrid? Are we going to start school remote? Obviously, not to belabor and go backwards, we started remote. We've learned a lot over that year. The thought exchange at that time, we had 1,069 participants who shared 1,350 thoughts. The polarizing piece of it was remote versus in person. It looked almost like that, only it wasn't about masks. It was half of our people wanted in person, half of our people wanted remote. Where did we come together? Where we came together is let's get our kids in school, do it well, and provide the proper supports for our kids and teachers. So a couple other things that as we desegregated data today, and we still have work to do on this, but we looked at our subgroups. And our subgroups told an interesting story as well, and I just want to hit a couple of highlights on that. The top 10 comments from subgroups remain the same as the top 10 general, which is get our kids in school and keep them in school. The data was pretty strong that teachers are in support of having masks at least to start as a mitigation strategy in order to keep the students here all day, every day. These were comments that were rated 3.3 and higher and were not rated as strongly by other subgroups in that exchange. Parents of high school students was one of our subgroups, were much more likely than parents of pre-K through 6 to support less quarantine, more masks, and keeping areas where students cannot be vaccinated, or students who were not vaccinated masked up. The primary comments around that was we don't want our kids quarantined, we want our kids to be able to do their activities and clubs and sports. And then the other significant subgroup that was in there were parents of students who were predominantly in grades K through 6. These individuals most likely would report that masks should be optional, vaccines should be optional, and the vaccine status should be kept private. So you can see there's just different feelings depending on where you are, where your children may be in school. The last thing that I'll say on this is we looked at the exchange, and we'll talk about this at the end about next steps. no matter where we end and where we go, and why I stress over and over, this is not a winner and loser, a right and wrong thing. There is no such thing in this particular argument, because there's going to be a day come where those sides are reversed. This evening, there's going to be individuals walking out of here and in our community that are like, happy, yes, this is the right thing, and individuals who are not. 3 months down the road, those roles may be reversed as we continue to move and evolve. The other piece is this is not a zero-sum game. This is not all or nothing. Last year, we started remote and we worked very hard to get our kids in school and systematically getting them in school. This year, it's the same thing. We've got them in school, that argument's gone, thank goodness. Now it's how do we continue to work toward that goal of choice while balancing out with safety? Because at the end of the day, it's about, I want my kids safe. Everybody in this room wants their children safe. We have different ideas of how to make that happen, and that's what makes this work. But also everybody in this room wants their kids in school, and we're just doing our best to try to figure out how to make that happen under competing guidance and constantly changing guidance. Friday evening, I can assure you this evening, whatever we decide, a week from now it's going to look different because things are changing that fast. Just like from our July board meeting to tonight, Friday evening we received a 27-page guidance update that was taken down on Saturday, reposted today, and by this afternoon we received an FAQ of guidance updates to go through. Thankfully, none of them are glaring items that cause maybe as much need for discussion as we have, but nevertheless, it's a lot for us to work through. So the next question we have to ask ourselves is, what do we know? Okay, we've got the what do we want. We want our kids in school. We want to create conditions where teachers teach and students learn. So now it's what do we know? Well, here's what we know. Attendance matters. We need our students to be in school 90% of the time for them to have the best chance of success. Students who are not in school 90% of the time are twice as likely to be high school dropouts, or 60% more likely not to be as successful in high school as they would have been. That points back to, we have to have our kids in school, especially after we've already went through what we did in the spring and then all of last school year with interrupted education, specifically from quarantine. That comes from attendance matters. That's people who spend their entire life's work looking at the impact of attendance on children in school. The next piece is extracurricular activities and clubs. Those are critical. Students who participate in extracurricular activities and clubs, again, are twice as likely to be successful throughout high school as students who do not. That's fine arts, that's athletics, that's clubs, that's community service, all the things that they do. The other piece is we also know that mitigations did work last year. So, to my point on this doesn't have to be all or none, or this is not a zero-sum game, here's what it looked like last year. And we have to work not only statewide and nationally with these mitigations, but we also have to work locally with our local health department. As you know, we went remote and we quickly started bringing students in. We actually had students in person within 2 weeks, and we continued to progressively bring students in person to where we had everybody in hybrid and to where we ultimately had everybody 4 days a week. Each time we did that, we lowered mitigations, but we increased others. When we started the school year, we didn't have all of our PPE in place. We didn't know what worked. We didn't know what didn't. But as the year moved along, we learned some things. One of the key pieces, one of the key transitional points for us last year was whenever we started Binax testing, because that aided us not only in identifying individuals who are COVID positive, but more so, it allowed us to eliminate unnecessarily quarantining people who may be experiencing symptoms that earlier in the fall we were quarantining over. Once we had that test and parents would consent to that test, we started keeping more kids in school. As we went into the spring, when we went 4 days a week, we had less mitigations, specifically social distancing. Those of you that were on the board and all the faculty, administration, and any teachers that were in the room in these discussions, remember the lengthy conversations we had about social distancing. There was a lot the entire year. What happened was whenever we reduced those mitigations, we still did not have an increase in spread, which was a good thing. It meant we were moving forward. So that brings me to this next point. Last year, we had some tools at our disposal that allowed us to continue to gain more freedoms and to get more normal education back. One of those tools at our disposal that was granted to us was called the adaptive pause. We certainly learned some things last year. I'd be the first to tell you, if I could go back last year to this date 1 year ago, there would be things we would do differently. But you don't know until you know. So we're trying to take those lessons learned and apply those to this year. You can criticize our approach last year. You can criticize if we should have went remote or not to the start. But what was fact was we went through the school year systematically and methodically and continued to increase in-person instruction without ever having to go backwards. We never had to shut school down. We never had to increase mitigations. We never had to go backwards. All of those things combined helped us. One of the things that helped us in that was the adaptive pause. So we were granted somewhere in the year last year, I don't remember where, as we decreased mitigations, we were given the ability to do the adaptive pause, meaning you don't have to shut your entire district down and go remote. So what school districts could do was shut their entire district down. They could shut a school down. They could shut a grade level, a classroom down, from on average anywhere 2 weeks to 2 days in order to get the spread and transmission of COVID down. We were lucky, and sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. We only had to do adaptive pauses twice in two pre-kindergarten classrooms for 2 weeks each, and that was out of an abundance of caution because we had a positive case, and as you know, if you know anything about pre-K, they're on top of each other. There's no distancing going on. So we did those 2 adaptive pauses. Well, this year, my hopes are, and we'll talk about this at the end as well, is as we continue to move forward, at a certain point, I've talked about what we know, and we know our mitigations worked. We know some of our strategies last year worked, but here's what we don't know. We don't know if putting everybody in here all together with no social distancing, right at the beginning of school, with no mask, we don't know if that works. But at some point, we've got to figure that out. We've got to figure that out. I'm not saying today's the day whenever we have an executive order, which we'll get to, whenever we have high transmission in our county, but that day's not going to last forever. There's going to be a point sooner than we think where we are going to have the ability to move. And at that time, can we point to, look, we have Binax now testing. We have shield screening in place. We have X percentage of our people vaccinated. And one of our speakers tonight was absolutely right. We have 50%, I believe, maybe just under in Sangamon County, but in the Rochester zip codes we have 60%, and our school data is even better. Our employee and staff data for vaccinations is even higher. It's very good. And also, we've had great participation in our clinics. So is that the time we can say, let us try? Can we move forward and try to see what our mitigations, these other things we have in place now that we didn't have last year, what that looks like? In our new adaptive pause, if you will, may end up being, okay, we can have a choice with masks. If you want to wear them, wear them. If you don't, don't. But if we get to a spot where we see substantial transmission, high transmission, maybe we have to put them back on for 2 weeks, 2 days, whatever, to make sure our kids stay in school, which is the ultimate goal. So this leads to a couple of questions. And I'm just going to walk through this decision-making tree, if you will, for the board. When it comes to our plan, and this plan we do have to adopt for the American Rescue Plan. Does the governor have the authority to issue the executive order, and is it a mandate that must be followed? So, at the beginning of all of this, whenever the CDC, the IDPH, ISBE, were all saying strongly recommended, those things were not a mandate. Now, with each piece of guidance that came out, and the sharper the language, and you stack them on top of each other, they became harder and harder for the district to ignore. But things change whenever you have an executive order, because whenever there is an executive order at that point, it does become something we have to respond to and something we have to strongly consider and listen to, or at least be aware of what the consequences may be. So the district has the responsibility to respond.
You can't, if you speak, we're gonna have to ask Officer Schwartz to take it off. Please don't do that, okay?
Well, he's wrong.
No.
The
You
judge
spoke,
already ruled, the Supreme Court said there's no
Mr.
statute
Jew,
of law.
listen, Paul. You spoke and he didn't interrupt. Now he's speaking on this report, okay?
Yeah, but he's giving false information. There's no effective law.
Some people believe you gave false information and no one interrupted you. No one interrupted.
I'll give $1,000 for anything I said that was wrong.
Guys, we're not doing this. Get back to the meeting.
And I'll move forward.
Should be no falsehoods when they're happening.
And I'll move forward. So, the governor's authority to issue executive orders has been challenged and upheld in court 69 times throughout the pandemic. They have been at the local level, the governor has lost. The governor lost in Clay County, but it was overturned at the appellate court here in Springfield. The governor has successfully,
The governor's not the king of the world, neither is Biden.
They already said he had no effect at all.
I'll continue. The governor successfully filed an injunction against one school district, and the State Board of Education cited 2 school districts for not following executive orders. What happens when the State Board of Education takes away a school district's recognition status? This is really important to consider, because once it becomes an executive order, the State Board does have the authority via a governor's injunction, or the State Board themselves can look at a school district's recognition. Any school district that would become unrecognized would lose their accreditation. Here's what that looks like. And within the slide, we have this, the lower the school district status is embedded in Illinois Administrative Code. First of all, here's what we have the responsibility to do. Anytime a school district's recognition gets unrecognition or loses its accreditation, ISBE takes 3 things into consideration. The school district exhibits deficiencies that present a health hazard or a danger to students or staff, fails or refuses to serve students according to relevant legal and or regulatory requirements, or prolongs or repeats instances of noncompliance to a degree that indicates an intention to not comply with relevant requirements. So what happens? So what happens, yes, you're on the loss of recognition status slide. Yeah. So what happens whenever a district loses recognition? First, the district's state funding is put on hold or in jeopardy. Rochester School District gets $7.2 million in state funding. Federal revenue is put in jeopardy. We receive $2.7 million in federal revenue and stand to lose an additional $1 million in American Recovery Plan dollars. The Rochester graduation diploma is devalued. So here's what that means. When the Rochester graduation diploma is devalued, if your school is unrecognized, what that means is instead of a diploma from a recognized school, it looks more like a certificate of completion, or like what a homeschool diploma would be. That in turn, any students who are applying to college or colleges with extremely competitive admission rates, that's going to hurt those students' application status. It does not mean they won't get admitted, but it's certainly going to be a different look coming from an unrecognized school versus a recognized school. The other piece is Rochester High School would not be allowed to compete or participate in IHSA sports or activities. And then last but not least, and I don't have on this slide, the district could, and I will enforce, could be subject to state takeover. Meaning the state runs the district, not the school board. Can the courts order districts to compel to comply? Yes, the courts can. The governor may file litigation seeking an injunction against a school district to compel compliance with the mask mandate. Current litigation, and is consolidated litigation against a school district in a case filed against the IDPH and ISBE, has currently been upheld in the courts. The court ruled in favor of the governor that the executive orders were lawfully issued and that the IDPH and ISBE lawfully issued guidance to enforce those orders. That case is, I believe, the Red Hill School District that was consolidated. It was consolidated with a suit from parents who challenged the IDPH and ISBE's ability and authority to be able to execute and carry out these orders. So what's the district's legal liability? So here's a couple pieces on the district's legal liability. There's tort immunity and discretionary immunity, which I'm going to talk about those together. Okay, a couple things besides just the legal liability. On top of the guidance we've received from ISBE, IDPH, CDC, all of these different organizations, we also have our insurance company who has said not only is it the best recommended strategy, it's the only advisable strategy is to follow this mandate. Now, that being said, and here's what everybody needs to know for full transparency, school districts do not have coverage, or the majority of school districts with insurance carriers in the state, many of us have the same carrier. You do not have liability coverage for COVID-19 or whooping cough, or you name the disease, the infectious disease. That's why we have pandemic preparedness plans. That's why we have policies and to try to put rules and procedures in place to combat that so you keep your tort immunity. So here's what happens in a tort immunity case, because we don't have insurance coverage that's going to cover us, so then we rely on our tort immunity, the ability to pay that via our tort fund. So if we would get challenged, okay, if the school district would get challenged for upholding the mask mandate, that's already been ruled on in court, and it's been ruled on. The school districts, ISBE, the governor, do have the authority to do those things. What hasn't happened yet is a wrongful injury or death suit in response to COVID-19, and school districts openly defying any executive order. At that point, we do know it would go to court. It would surely go to court for a while, because we would be willfully and wantonly, and that's the key, willfully and wantonly defying any type of mandate, executive order, and best practice guidance. So here's what this looked like before. Before we had the executive order, if we chose not to, as a school district, if we chose to allow choice and not follow that guidance, when we get in front of the courts are going to say, as a school district, why did you decide not to follow the CDC, the IDPH, ISBE? Why did you decide not to follow these organizations and their guidance? Our response cannot be because the majority of our people didn't want it, or because we didn't like it. Our response has to be an educational decision. We have to have an educational related decision that says at Rochester School District, we chose not to wear masks because we can show a student's education was negatively affected by this, and this. We do not have that. Okay, but in the chance we did, let's say we did have that argument or data to say this is why we chose not to do it. A judge then likely is going to say, well, I don't know if I buy that, but you're the educator, you have the educational expertise, I'm going to defer to you there. That doesn't mean it's over. At that point is, what did you do then? Okay, if you didn't allow masks, what did you do? And it goes back to that first question I asked at the beginning, what do we want? Well, we have to be prepared at that time then to say, well, we increase social distancing, which then impedes the way we want to teach and learn. We increase contact tracing. We increase quarantining. That would be one of the key pieces if we did mask optional to start. All of what I just described is a bit of a moot point whenever the executive order comes in place, because now it's not about an educational reason, it's why did you defy an executive order, which has a whole different set of teeth to that. A district who loses their tort immunity and their discretionary immunity, which let me pause on the discretionary immunity. This is a term we don't use a lot in school districts. We do use the tort piece a great deal. Discretionary immunity is except as otherwise provided by statute. A public employee serving in a position involving the determination of policy or the exercise of discretion is not liable for an injury resulting from his or her act or omission in determining policy when acting in the exercise of such discretion, even though abused. Acting in defiance of a mandate would be qualified as willful and wanton and would subject us to losing both our tort and discretionary immunity, which at that point would then have the district paying this out of pocket on their own. We don't know what that would cost because we haven't seen it. Estimates we received are anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 to defend one single case. That does not include any judgment that would be made for personal injury or harm. So the next question that comes up is, can individual board members and administrators be held personally liable? Yes. We also lose civil immunity. Right now, as school board members, administrators, and quite frankly, all of our employees in the district, we enjoy what's called civil immunity, meaning if we're acting in best interest of the child, in best interest according to policy, board policy, and any state laws, administrative code, or mandates that would be presented upon us, we enjoy civil immunity and protections in the courts. The minute we lose civil immunity for willful and wanton conduct, board and administration could be held personally liable for that, meaning you would defend those cases on your own. The threshold, the standard of the threshold starts with the board and the superintendent, and then it works its way down through the district. So the people in this room would be the greatest risk, followed by the administration, and then ultimately employees for acting in a willful or wanton conduct manner. The next piece is for myself as superintendent. If I were to recommend to go against the order this evening, it would be a misdemeanor that could be subject to possible fines or arrest, and it would place my professional educator license in jeopardy. So a question has come up: how will the district enforce universal masking for individuals who may refuse to wear them? First and foremost, we're going to appeal to our sense of community good. I really sincerely hope that's all here and there. Our kids did an unbelievable job last year. Was it perfect? No. Did we have times where masks weren't worn properly? Yes. But overall, kids did a great job. Once they came to school, they got there, it went well, and we hope, and we're going to work for a day when that's going to be a choice and an option. So here's what this looks like. We're going to appeal to our sense of community. We're going to appeal to our, education and talking with individuals, really reinforcing that we want to keep that ability to eliminate or significantly reduce contact tracing and quarantine as long as we're wearing masks and as long as we don't have high transmission. We want the ability to do that, and all children deserve the ability to stay in school all day, every day with the best chance possible. In the event that we continue to deal with individual students who refuse or individual parents who refuse, it will look different at each grade level. The bottom line is, what it looks like when we come to school, there's in loco parentis, which is hard for people to understand, but it is in fact law and in code. In loco parentis means to promote the well-being of education and safety for all schools, for all school officials are charged with acting in the place of the parent during the school day. It means simply, at school during the school day, for the best interest of the health and safety, as well as the best interest of everyone's education, school officials do act in place of the parent, and any regulation or supervision by an administrative body is also acting in loco parentis, meaning the school board has to have the best interest of all in mind during that school day. There cannot and will not be a zero tolerance for non-compliance with wearing masks. That's not where we are. That's not where we're going to be. But what would happen is there would be education, intervention, and ultimately progressive discipline. Administration are addressing that specifically to each building because it's going to look different. It will look different for an elementary student than it would a high school student and the schools in between. The next piece is what happens if a student arrives at school who's under quarantine orders. If we have an individual who arrives at school under quarantine orders, that individual would then be placed in our health services offices. We do have isolation rooms for COVID-19. We would call the parents and ask them to come pick them up because they are under said quarantine orders. At that point, we hope that would be, complied with. In the event it's not, it can result in a DCFS call under the Mandated Reporter Act. I would hope we'd not have to do that or get to that point. So what's next? And I've hit this a few times through this presentation, but I think it bears repeating. We do have a duty to move forward. This is where we are today. It doesn't mean it's where we're going to be 2 weeks from now, a month from now. I do believe the board has a responsibility. We as an administration and a school district have a responsibility to keep pushing to see how we can move forward and do that in a safe manner and do it in collaboration with various agencies, most importantly our local health department, who's going to be a key to this. So we do have a duty to move forward, and we have to ask ourselves the questions: how can we get to mask optional? When is that right time? It's going to happen. It's going to happen this school year. Can I say when today? I can't. I can tell you we need the mask mandate to go away, and that quarrel's not with the people in this room. Talk to your local legislatures. That's where that fight needs to go. We're frustrated about quarantine protocols. Talk with the IDPH, but more importantly, make your voice heard at your local health department meetings, because there's significant challenges there. What role does screening and vaccination play, if any? This is a question I have. We are working incredibly hard and spending an incredible amount of time giving parents choice and creating conditions for people to have a buffet of options. We have not mandated vaccination. We have not mandated that you participate in screening, Binax or Shield. But we are giving individuals the choice and option. But my question to the health department, my question to the IDPH is, if we have done all these things, we have protective equipment, we have cleaning, we're upgrading our controls, our HVAC controls to have better airflow and ventilation. We're doing Shield testing, we're doing Binax Now testing. Okay, our school district is one of the leading school districts in the county and the area. in terms of vaccination participation, in terms of screening, Binax now and shield screening. So the question is, if we can't eventually move forward, what are we doing all of this for? I think that's a legitimate question and something we will continue to push for. The next piece is, what does it look like in our region? What do our regional schools say? You know, for a little levity, because this has been a lot of heavy stuff, let's talk about snow days, right? Everybody loves snow days, and that's a polarizing topic. You never want to be the person, you never want to be the poor superintendent that's the only one going to school whenever the weather's terrible, and you never want to be the only one out of school when everybody else is in. So we all try to see, hey, what are you doing? What do you know that we don't? And as much as possible, you try to be similar. Well, the same case is here. You don't want to be the school district on an island in your region. We can't really look at other states because that doesn't apply to us. When we look at the laws of tort and civil immunity, we have to look at what do people in your region and in your state do versus those that don't. Okay? Today, I posed a question with our Regional Office of Education. Said I would like to know before our meeting this morning where everybody is with respect to these school boards who have had, are having maybe tonight, or will have this week. They're having the same discussions and debates, so it too can change. That being said, in our region, ROE 51, as of today, everyone's plan is similar to ours, which does include masks. So the question would be, what do we know that everybody else doesn't if we would go a different direction? We do have to have questions about where the Sangamon County Department of Public Health will stand on helping us move forward. Their stance has been very conservative. I've made that known. I have reasons to believe over recent days that they will continue to be conservative. That's where, again, I think it's extremely important. The more we can eliminate or significantly reduce contact trace quarantine by using practices like masks, that gives us the best chance to keep kids in school all day, every day. And the last but not least is we need grace. We need grace with each other. We need grace among our employees and our students and among our community. This is fluid. You know, I've never seen a situation in my career where adaptive leadership is more important, knowing what we know tonight's going to change tomorrow. I told you today, I received 27 pages Friday night, 27 pages this morning, and another FAQ I didn't even get to before the board meeting tonight. It's changing rapidly and continues to change, but ultimately we have to focus on how can we get in school, kids in school, keep them in school, and also keep moving forward. We've come a long way, and I'll close with this. Back to last year's thought exchange. Ultimately, we wanted our kids in school. That was our concern. Our concern internally, how are we going to get kids to wear masks? How are we going to, get 50 kids on a bus, 50 kids in a lunchroom? How are we going to social distance 6 feet? That was our concern. Our parents' concern was get them in school now. Okay? I feel, what I keep going back to, if we could go back in a time machine and say, last year and say, hey, if we just put these on for a while, your kids can go to school all day, every day, and they can play ball, and they can do their clubs, they can do their performances, they can be in band. Most of us would have taken that in a heartbeat a year ago. Now a lot's changed. So with that, I'll open up the floor to any questions from the board.
I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you for the thorough research and information.
I asked the question during a July meeting. It sounds like the answer was with the shield testing, if we do not have a mask policy, obviously this was 2 weeks ago, a week ago, prior to the governor's declaration, if that changed the quarantine procedures for those kids who were taking the safety protocols in place, masking or anything else, right? And so can you elaborate again on that? If that
Yes.
does indeed.
Yes. So there's a couple different options out there, but the simplest answer is if we want to have a chance for a 7-day quarantine, a 10-day quarantine, no quarantine, or test to stay, there has to be masking in place. Specifically to your question on test to stay policy, so I want to be very clear, just because you have masking policy in place does not 100% eliminate contact trace and quarantine. One of the areas we're still going to have close contacts is in the lunchroom. Kids are going to be eating with their mask off, which automatically would say, hey, if somebody's COVID positive, there's going to be close contacts there, okay? So then, what we would look at next, let's say child X is a close contact in the lunchroom. Our next option would be looking at the test to stay policy. Obviously, it takes parental consent to do that. You can't test somebody without said consent. Well, in the ISBE guidance for that, a couple of things have to take place. I guess the cafeteria would be a bad example because they have the mask off, so strike that. Classroom. One of the first things that have to take place is you have to make sure that the individuals who infected and the individuals who the close contact both had their mask on. If the answer is yes, we go to the next step. If the answer is no, you do go into quarantine. But in that next step, if the answer is yes, then it has to come down to, at minimum, the school district has to have a policy, a universal mask policy for unvaccinated, at minimum, to be able to do test to stay. Now, that doesn't take into place like if you did the 10-day, 7-day, or the need to not contact trace or quarantine. Another change with contact trace and quarantine that did come up with this new guidance, and I believe we just updated since the board has seen it last, is outdoors. Individuals do not have to wear masks outdoors, and generally there's not a need to quarantine or contact trace as long as people aren't spending a great deal of time on top of each other in a crowded area. But for like your typical recess, that's not going to be the case, though I don't think we really struggled with that last year. Lunchroom was, if I had to guess right now, still our highest area for quarantine, other than activities, clubs, sports.
So I know that the question was asked and about what legal advice has been given to the school, and I know that you've addressed the different legal theories under which we could be liable or under which we could have protection, but I don't know if you specifically answered the legal advice that was directly given to us as a district, and I would want you to share that.
That is to follow the mask mandate. That's our best, lowest risk. I have asked for our council to issue an opinion letter in writing. I did that last week. We haven't gotten that yet. Obviously, they're writing those for a lot of school districts right now. I just checked my email just to make sure it hadn't popped up in there yet, but it's not there yet.
I just thought it was important that that is shared.
Yes.
Are there any other questions or comments from the board members?
I just want to express my opinion and let everybody know in the room that it's my priority. I've thought about this for a long time, prior to even last night's meeting, is that our priority has to be safe kids first. Our second priority is to have kids in school. I have a daughter, she's in high school. She had a tough time. And I couldn't fault her because I would have a tough time. It's hard for me to stay focused most of the day, to be blunt and honest with you. So, to be able to sit at home with all the different distractions and everything that they have is very hard. Secondly is to keep them in school. And I think that everything that we're doing right now is the right thing to do. And someone brought up the fact that the governor's being a bully, or he's trying to, push his agenda on everybody. Well, sometimes the bully wins initially. And that's just the way life works. And I think we can take that information and go to the right avenues. I don't believe this is the right avenue to try and fight that at this point. It only hurts the kids. And so I believe we're doing the right thing and we're going in the right direction. I would ask that I would put out there how often do we want to review this protocol? I want to put that down and I want to stick to that. Even if it's every other week, even, monthly, whatever we decide as a board, I want to have that down so that the public knows that we're going to continue to try and do what's best for the kids and also keep the options open as much as possible without hurting the kids. That's what we're here for. I'm not here to push an agenda. I don't like the mask, I'll be honest with you. But my child doesn't really care. She'd rather be in school. And I'm just gonna stick with that.
I can address one of your points,
Yes.
Mr. Hanna, and thank you for sharing that. And I think, if for nothing else, I would like to share this too. Believe you me, if I could trade places with a lot of people, I would. This is not the position I want to be in, to be caught between this rock and a hard place. It is extremely difficult. But that being said, we're not called upon to be in these positions when it's just easy. You need people to step up when times are hard, and times are certainly hard right now. I have personal feelings and beliefs, but nevertheless, I agree with you that if here's what I know. There's a lot I don't know, especially when it comes to the best health and safety practices. But what I do know and dedicate my life and professional career to is what's best for kids in an education standpoint. And I know this: keeping them in school as much as possible is what's best. And we may have to do some things at first that we don't like. However, we can at least advance and move forward. To your point of review of the plan, this plan is something we're required to have in place for 3 years, and the board's no less than every 6 months required to review said plan. I think it's written in there. Now, when I said no less than 6 months, well, to me, especially here early on, I think it's really reasonable to assume we're going to be talking about this again in Labor Day, because based on what we learned last year, we knew a lot more at Labor Day than we knew in July and August. And we knew even more in October and even more in November. So I do think it's reasonable that we're going to have at minimum updates about how things are going, what we're thinking. Much like you probably saw most of the year last year. I think we looked at our plans almost monthly. Maybe at the end we didn't there in May. But I think from the beginning of school till at least March or April, we were at minimum discussing plans. Whether we made changes or not was a different.
To piggyback on that, I do have a question then. So last year, we voted on a plan that allowed you to slide from remote to hybrid to full learning without really having to have us vote on it. On the masks, are we gonna have to vote on it to go to optional, or is that something where, like, if there was something that changed with the mandate going away a week after a board meeting, are you gonna have to schedule a special one or wait for the next board meeting in order to change our stance on masks?
This evening, we don't have that in play.
Okay.
That's certainly something we could address at the next regular meeting, and it would be the purview of the board. If the board wants to get together every time a major change is made, you can certainly do that via your next regular, special, or even an emergency meeting. I did talk to council about that. Dr. McGulius and I had this conversation that if the board wanted to get together, for example, if it's made mask optional, the board wanted to do that, we could do that under an emergency meeting and do it right away, so we weren't wasting a lot of time. We could do it at a special meeting, which would then require at least 48 hours of notice to do that. It really comes down to your purview. Are you required to do that? No. Because it's an executive order and mandate. If it was not an executive order and mandate, then you could do what you want. But you really, at this point, when it's an executive order and mandate, once we've adopted this plan, if the next order says you can make them optional, the school district can make them optional. Now, I'm not saying that's what we should do, but I think that's something for you to talk about. What I can do at the next meeting is bring you a resolution that would give superintendent authority, a resolution that would say, no, we're going to meet, or it could be a resolution that says we're going to follow the guidance. I think that's something to think about, and if you have questions, I can try to answer those as we go forward. And today, I think there's benefits to all of those strategies, but I don't think it's just your preference. I think I'll just leave it at that as a school board.
Thinking back on last year, we started school 100% remote. Before the end of the first quarter, we were in our hybrid plan, 2 days in school. And when was it that we changed to full?
Probably March. Would that be about right? I think it was March.
And I remember in late October, I remember you telling us, I really want to try to move to our full plan around Thanksgiving.
Yes.
That was what you wanted to do.
Yes.
That's what you were talking to the board members about. you were anxious and wanting to move kids further along into what looked like normal and felt like normal to them. So, and then things kind of blew up with numbers. As somebody stated earlier, the highest numbers was November to February, and that put everything on hold. We couldn't move forward with that plan at that time, and we did as those numbers decreased and we were into March. So thinking that through and knowing how you, as the superintendent making a recommendation to us, you're thinking about allowing kids to be in school as many days, as many minutes as possible, in the freest way possible that we can, using mitigations, using precautions. I believe, again, that that's what your intent will be as we continue to move forward this year. I have confidence in that. I saw that last year. I know I have confidence in that this year, and I think the shield testing, for those who elect to participate in that, is one way to help us with decreasing quarantine and contact tracing, masking or masks optional. So I know you're doing everything you can to bring into play the mitigations that will help us get our schools back to where we want them to be. And I'm just saying that because I recognize it and I appreciate it, and I feel confident that that's where we'll continue to keep watching and moving. We didn't wait 6 months. It happened before the end of first quarter. We had already made a change in our learning plan.
I guess I will just say that I don't really see a different path that's available to us. Because of the executive order and because of the united goal that we want the kids in school, and importantly, we want the activities that we couldn't make work with remote last year, a lot of those things, for those kids, I don't see a path other than the one that we have at the moment with all the restrictions and the legalities that are on us. I don't see a different way at this time. But I'm with you. I'm confident that when there starts to be an opening for us to reevaluate and change it, that we will look at it earnestly and do it as soon as we can to keep everybody safe but in school and moving forward.
On that note, would you mind bringing a resolution next month that would allow us to empower you to make that change without us?
We already have a couple of them drafted.
Okay.
Those have been, so yes, we can do that.
I just assume you not have to wait.
Just want to point out that I do have one of those second graders who's never seen a full normal school year. And I could say he doesn't want to wear a mask. He's not that. But I wasn't elected to serve him. It's about all the kids. And we require kids to be in school. It's mandatory they be here. We don't have the same options with remote learning that was there last year. And so I just, the best path forward to keeping kids there learning with their teachers in the classroom, regardless of this thing, is this thing. And so I just want to put that out there, because I know that that's a big thing out there. And again, it's not about my kid. It's not about any one of our kids. It's about all of the kids, keeping them there. I don't want them to have to wear a mask any longer than they have to. But I also know that those vaccines are not available for certain buildings. We don't have a single kid vaccinated. They're not eligible. I'm not suggesting ever that we require a vaccine, but the moment that a vaccine is available, that parent truly does have the choice there. They've now taken that, they've been given the option, they've been given the full suite. If they have a different concern, different opinion about this entire pandemic than another person, they truly have that option now. They've been given that choice. They did not force your kid to get a vaccine. But we want to keep them there. I want to keep them there. So I don't see another path without having masks right now to keep them in school, not jumping back and forth between quarantines, with limited remote capabilities, and really falling behind even further than they already have.
Are there any additional questions or comments regarding the instructional continuity learning plan?
Except to say thank you. We're here. We have a place forward.
Is there a motion to approve the instructional continuity learning plan?
I'll make that motion. I'll second.
Thank you. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Hannah,
Yes.
Dr. Magulius,
Yes.
Mr. Gade,
Yes.
Mr. Jewell,
Yes.
Mr. File,
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds,
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson.
Yes.
Okay, just an announcement, before COVID protocols were in place, our board meetings were not streamed. Since capacity limits were lifted this summer, there's a change. We will not be streaming our board meetings anymore. There's no capacity limits. I assume we'll stay here for some time, so. Adjournment, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
All in favor say aye.
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 This meeting is adjourned at 7:56.